Welcome back to Key Connections for Educators. Hannah and I are really glad that you've joined us. We talked last episode about education being a necessity for social progress and how we as educators can see ourselves as change agents. Now we got to figure out how to communicate that to other people, whether it's the school district administration or in the corporate world, it's maybe the people that hold the money strings on the budget. So what do we do to communicate the value of learning and the value of education in the world today?
That's exactly the question that we need to be asking ourselves as educators. We know that training and education is important. Organizations that invest in employee training experience 11% greater profitability than organizations that do not. We see that increased productivity and performance, faster ramp times, higher job satisfaction, lower employee turnover, increased consistency, and enhanced reputation and demand of the company or of that team or of that department, even of that school. We know these stats, but how do we show and influence stakeholders that our training is truly a return on investment? And that starts with us as trainers and educators being curious and asking questions and really getting to the heart of what do these leaders, what do these administrators, what do these stakeholders want changed? What is their bottom line?
We've talked about this a lot. You don't really know what you even want to train unless you actually know what you're looking for. What does success even look like? What do we actually want to measure? What is the outcome really that we're looking for? Have you ever had training just for training's sake? I'm saying that like rhetorically, but I'm sure that you've had those experiences. We're going to do training. And you're like, do you need to do training? Like, are things not going right? Well, no, they're going fine. We just think that we should do training on it. What are you looking for? I don't know.
Really zeroing in on why the training is needed so that we really can measure that why and then show training moved the needle in some way or made a great impact or produced these results. And I'm thinking about when I was an operations trainer, there was such an importance of partnering with quality. I really became best friends with my quality partner. Shout out to Melissa. In the same way, thinking about rubrics designed for high school students who want to know how to get an A on their English paper or a college project. Trainees want to know how they too can score an A on the test. And so by really understanding what our QA was assessing and evaluating, I could build that into how I trained my new hires into their roles. So they knew right from the get-go, okay, this is how I'm going to be measured. This is how I can be successful. And those are the real benchmarks and the objectives that I need to hit. And so it was so helpful for me to know from her, my QA partner, what those measurements were. But then in turn, that's what I used to develop my way of measuring student progress throughout the 6 weeks of onboarding my new hires.
That's spot on, because as long as the objectives of your training is aligned with what the actual business impact is, it's going to work really well. And I want to pull this back and just give an example that I was thinking of while you were sharing that. That's not necessarily employer specific. So if you've had any experience with youth sports, you probably know that a good coach isn't just looking to win games. They do. Like, we all want to win games. That's hopefully the end result. But a good coach is looking at their bench and looking at the players and saying, what are the outcomes I'm looking at for you to become better at this sport? And enjoy it more while you're doing it. Because a kid, or an adult really, that doesn't know how to be a good soccer player, it's just running around aimlessly or doesn't know where to be on the field, there's some anxiety there. There's some problems. Like, I know sort of the ball goes that way, but I don't know what to do with it when I have it. Or, all these people seem like they're in sync and I'm out of sync with everything. And so a good coach is able to lock in on those things, give that kind of feedback. But the only way they know to do that is they understand the fundamentals of the game. And they can actually then apply those fundamentals towards those youth athletes and say, all right, you were here and I need to get you here. And so what is it that I need to work with you on in order to get to that next step? That's training. And what we want to talk about today is how do we create a good measurement so that we can show the results? Because it is a little squishy, right? Like, There's a whole bunch of different things that go into evaluating performance. Training is one of them. So evaluating the effectiveness of the training program in itself is what we want to do. There was a very famous model that Hannah and I are going to talk through, Kirkpatrick's model. It's just 4 levels. I don't think we're going to get to all 4 today, but we want to talk about what happens when you start applying Kirkpatrick in the real world and you start to see some of the things that are really nice about it. And there's some rub that we got with it. Like, what does this even really mean? Level 1 in Kirkpatrick's model is reaction. So what are your thoughts on what is it that we're trying to do with level 1s? What are we even trying to measure here?
Level 1 would be those evaluation questions about satisfaction, how engaged participants are with the training or with the class. It doesn't have to be a longer thing. This can be something that can be quick at the end of a workshop, at the end of a class. And that also includes how relevant the participants found it to be. I actually used level 1 when I was going through my master's degree. I was teaching during the day and I would go to school at night, and we had a project where I asked my students to rate activities and some of our projects and lessons we did, not only to offer them a voice in what they liked and they preferred, but also to give them an opportunity to share their honest opinion, to let me know how I could improve as their teacher. And it was fascinating, just gathering those results and implementing that exercise with my students. And teachers of elementary or middle school students, have you considered your class giving you this kind of feedback to improve? It was simple questions. And I was even thinking about how we can simply ask our participants in a workshop or a class, did the content of this course or program, did it keep me engaged? And then they can score whether that's strongly disagree to strongly agree or a 1 to 5 scale. And the other part would be, did the facilitators promote equal treatment and full participation of all participants? That's another great question to gather the level 1 data around the actual course and what you designed and what you put forth.
When we're doing a level 1 evaluation, we truly do want feedback on the course and the experience, and the facilitators. For a long time, we'd fill out level 1s at the end of a course. And I remember we started referring to them as smile sheets, because like most people just like, it's the end of the course, 5, 5, 5, 5. Or like every once in a while you run into somebody that does have some meaningful feedback, or somebody that absolutely hates it. And so as a facilitator, you can stop caring if you see too many of these, because you're like, oh, they're all 5s, except for that one guy. He clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, or she doesn't know what she's talking about. That's dangerous to have a reaction towards the reactions, because if we really don't care about them, or if we care in the wrong way, that's equally dangerous. I had a boss one time that wanted to attach level 1 evaluations to everybody's performance appraisals at the end of the year, but not level 2, 3, 4, right? And I was like, wait, really? That's just like, do they like me or not? That's going to be what my performance evaluation is going to be on. Because I know there's some people that are incredibly funny that don't do an effective job with the rest of the content. Yeah, I could just play games all day and not get any learning done, but my level 1s are going to be through the roof.
I think that's really important. Thank you for pointing out the dangers, because there are dangers with that. I've also seen it where they only ask level 1 questions at the end of a training program, and then you really don't get the ROI, the return on investment results that you want to have to see, did that move the needle? Because ultimately level 1 doesn't show us that.
Yeah. So let's go back to that question. What is it that we truly want to know? And that's the root of this. So like, what do you actually want to know as a facilitator? What's the feedback that you actually want to take and use to shape what's next? A couple of years ago, I was in a role where we had customer service reps, and then they got a survey at the end of it. Like, how likely are you to recommend XYZ company to someone else based on your interactions with us? The idea of net promoter scores, NPS scores, you may have heard that. They're usually on a 10-point scale. And it really had to do with customer experience. And that really actually changed my mind on level 1s, because I started to think about, how likely are you to recommend this course to a coworker? That's interesting, because that's the same kind of question as engagement, but it's the whole level of clarity that I really would like to have as a facilitator. So I have people that are like, it was fine, but I'm not really going to encourage anybody to come see that. There's something that I need to follow up with. And then maybe there's a why or why not that's engaged in that.
I did want to circle back on the importance of having some open-ended questions so we really get more accurate feedback. If someone does score us as neutral for, was this workshop engaging? Well, why was your answer neutral? Why wasn't it agree or disagree? Even when I did that with my fourth graders, having those boxes and seeing some of the things that they had written in, it improved my execution of the next lesson. And from their responses, I was able to tailor and customize what I was doing in my lessons for my audience, for my students. And I see that as something we can adapt as trainers, no matter what age group we're working with, because we start, especially if we're working with them over time, we can get their feedback in week 1 and realize, oh, I'm going to tailor week 2 a little bit more to meet them where they're at because they're giving me this feedback.
Yeah. And I think there's something interesting we can do because it's qualitative feedback, not quantitative feedback, right? So if you have a 1 through 10 or 1 through 5 or 1 through 4, then now I have numbers that I can associate with that. I can get a raw score and I can spit that out. But even with the qualitative, if you have a large number of people over the course of a couple of years, you can start to put those words into something like a word cloud or a word generator, and you can start to see the themes appear. And then even though it's qualitative, you can actually quantify the qualitativeness by looking at those themes and seeing if there's anything that sticks out, good, bad, or neutral.
When I led our leadership development class, it was 5 months. And that's exactly what I did, is I curated those open-ended qualitative responses. And I looked for those themes in order to pull out. And depending on how many people addressed those particular elements, that's how I formulated my continuous improvement plan for, okay, what was I going to address the next time I led this leadership development course?
Yeah. And I think that's important because, one person that doesn't like something does not necessarily mean you change the whole thing. You need to have some statistically relevant, right? They could have had a bad day, or maybe I had a bad day as a facilitator and said something.
Right.
That just,
that's fair.
Right. I made a comment that rubbed them the wrong way and everyone else in the class loved it, right? It's still good feedback to say, hey, be careful of what you're saying in the classroom. But at the same time, you may not ever run into somebody that's going to react that way again. So we want to make sure it's statistically relevant feedback as well. So when you're seeing those themes, if you're seeing all 5s all the time and you have one person that says a 1, the other part, though, might be to go follow up with them if you can.
Exactly.
If you can. Because maybe you had people that were just like, it's the end of the class, I want to get out of here. I'm going to put 5s, right? The person that took the time to put a 1 or really took the time to write more. So I don't know how you feel about the anonymity of some of these. It is important to create that place where you can say, this is anonymous feedback. However, if you're comfortable putting your name on this so I can follow up with you with questions, I'd really like to do that because that gives us the opportunity to get even better.
I love putting it on the audience member, especially when we're dealing with adults. If you feel comfortable, put your name, because you're right. There is kind of a, but thinking back to my own experience when I was doing teacher workshops, I did offer that at the end of a workshop for people to put their names. And I connected with a few teachers after the workshop because of questions they particularly asked on their survey feedback. And then that created a next step, a part 2 of how they then could have my support regarding the content and how they could integrate it into their classroom. And so to your point, it does work. Again, giving that option, I think, creates some of that psychological safety we need so that we're getting honest, accurate responses as well.
Yeah. Just to summarize, we all know evaluation is important. Level 1 evaluation is a reaction, but there's still information we can get from a reaction. And we want to know how people are reacting to something because first, it's engagement. If somebody's not engaged, consistently disengaged, they're clearly going to have an impact on the learning environment. We all know that. The other thing that we want to look for is creating those spaces where we can have both qualitative and quantitative feedback. So having some things that are on that number line, but also leaving the place for people to explain and elaborate a little bit further is really important and helpful. I guess the last thing I'd say, and I'll maybe Hannah, you have a couple other thoughts on this, is remember to take yourself out of these when you're reviewing them. even though you're part of what's being evaluated potentially as an instructional designer or a facilitator or a trainer, it's a lens through which we can get better. So even if it stunk, if we got feedback, it's a gift and we can use it to make the next one better.
I'm so glad you said that, because you're right. It is easy to take it personally if that's the lens we're viewing it from. And yet, at the same time, it's all about growth mindset. This can often be your baseline data. I remember the first time I led the leadership development course, I just wanted that baseline data because I realized every program after this was going to get better and better and better, but you had to start somewhere. And so I just encourage all of you trainers, classroom teachers out there, don't be afraid to get that feedback, because like Nate said, feedback is a gift. And if we see it through a growth mindset, that's how we can raise our talent. That's how we can raise the bar for what we're doing as facilitators and instructional designers as well.
So if you have a favorite level 1 question of your own, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear some of your favorite ones. And we'd also love to hear your reaction to just our discussion here. So if you've got a comment or want to elaborate on why you either disagree or agree with what we're doing here, we want to make sure that you have the ability to chime in on this discussion too.
And how we can get better and improve our podcast and provide better, relevant material, content, all of it. We want to hear from you.